An old man lies on a low bed in a house in Egypt, and he cannot see the ceiling above him anymore. His eyes gave out years ago. But his mind is sharp, sharper than it has been in a decade, because he knows this is the last week of his life, and he has 12 things left to say. He calls for his sons. Not as a group. One at a time. You can picture the room. Mud brick walls. A single lamp burning low. The smell of oil and old age. And one by one, grown men, some of them fathers themselves, one of them the second most powerful man in Egypt, duck through that doorway to stand beside their dying father's bed and hear what he has to say about them. His name is Jacob. Though for most of his life, God called him Israel. What he says to each son in that room is not a blessing in the soft, greeting card sense of the word. Some of it sounds like praise. Some of it sounds like a curse. All of it, whether the son standing there understood it or not, was prophecy. This is not a family tree. This is not a list of names for a Sunday school poster. This is not ancient trivia you memorize and forget. This is a father's last words, deciding, whether his sons liked it or not, the next 3,000 years. Here is the part almost no one talks about. 12 sons walked into that room. 12 tribes would carry their names forward into history. And by the end of this video, you will understand that 10 of those 12 tribes, 10 out of 12, would eventually vanish from the pages of history so completely that entire theories have been built around the question of where they went. One of the names spoken in that room that day would end up being one of the most debated tribal names in the modern world, quoted, claimed, argued over on 3 different continents, thousands of years after the man who bore it first drew breath. We will get to that name. But not yet. First, you need to understand what it actually meant, in that culture, in that room, to hear your own father tell you, to your face, exactly who you were. Jacob starts with his firstborn. Reuben. In Hebrew, the name means something close to behold, a son, but it also echoes another phrase, one his mother Leah spoke through tears when he was born. The Lord has seen my affliction. Reuben's whole name was born out of a woman who felt unloved, begging God to notice her. And for a while, it worked. Reuben had the birthright. The double portion. The leadership of the entire family, waiting for him, simply because he came first. And then he threw it away. You don't hear this story in Sunday school very often, but Reuben slept with his father's concubine Bilhah, a woman who had raised his own younger brothers, and Jacob heard about it and Jacob never forgot. Years later, on that deathbed, the first words out of the dying man's mouth to his own firstborn are not comfort. They are a verdict. Unstable as water, you shall not excel. The birthright, gone. Not because Jacob was cruel. Because a father who forgets nothing was finally saying it out loud. Here's what most people miss. Reuben's tribe would go on to settle east of the Jordan River, on the far side of the Promised Land, slightly apart from everyone else, a tribe that history quietly nudged to the margins, the same way Reuben nudged himself there the day he made that choice. Next in that room, 2 brothers who came in together. Simeon and Levi. These 2 were closer than brothers usually are, closer, and more dangerous. When their sister Dinah was assaulted in the city of Shechem, Simeon and Levi didn't wait for their father to respond. They tricked an entire city into circumcising themselves, and then, while the men of that city were recovering, wounded and defenseless, Simeon and Levi walked in with swords and killed every one of them. Jacob never forgave that either. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are in their dwellings. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce. I will divide them in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel. Stay with me, because this is where it gets remarkable. That curse came true for both of them, but in two completely different directions. Simeon's tribe would shrink, absorbed almost entirely into the territory of Judah, until it barely existed as its own people. Levi, though, would be scattered in a way nobody in that room could have predicted. Levi's descendants would receive no land of their own at all. Instead, they would be scattered on purpose, given cities inside every other tribe's territory, because Levi's descendants would become the priests. The curse of scattering became the architecture of the entire priesthood. The same words. Two brothers. Two completely different endings. And then Judah stepped forward. Judah is the brother who once suggested selling Joseph into slavery instead of killing him outright, not exactly a hero's introduction. But something changes in Judah as his story goes on. By the time his own daughter-in-law Tamar has to trick him into doing right by her, Judah is the one man in that whole family who publicly admits his own guilt instead of hiding it. She is more righteous than I, he says, in front of everyone. That kind of honesty gets rewarded. Jacob's words over Judah are the longest, and the most astonishing, of all 12. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. A king would come from this line. Every king who ever sat on a throne in Jerusalem would trace his blood back to this one brother who once sold his own sibling for silver. 4 sons down. For very different futures already locked in, one man pushed to the margins, 2 brothers cursed turned into 2 opposite destinies, and 1 betrayer turned into the ancestor of kings. But these 4 are the ones history remembers easily. There's one more thing you need to understand before we go further. 8 brothers are still waiting in that room. And what happens to their tribes is so much stranger, and so much sadder, than anything you've heard so far. So that's 4 sons down. If you're finding this half as fascinating as I am, hit subscribe, because we've got 8 more sons to go, and this is where the story turns from family drama into one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in ancient history. Drop a comment with which tribe you're most curious about, because by the end of this video, most of them are going to disappear right off the map. 8 brothers left in that room. Watch what Jacob says to them. The next voice Jacob hears belongs to Dan. Dan means he judged. His mother Rachel's servant Bilhah gave birth to him, and Rachel named him that because she felt God had finally judged in her favor after years of being unable to have children of her own. A name born out of relief. But Jacob's words over Dan are strange, almost cryptic. Dan shall judge his people, as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, that bites the horse's heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. Here's the part nobody tells you, that image would echo forward for centuries. Long after Jacob died, the tribe of Dan would move north, take a city, rename it after themselves, and set up their own golden calf for worship there, one of the first tribes to turn toward idolatry so openly that later biblical writers seem almost reluctant to mention them at all. Some ancient Jewish lists of the tribes leave Dan out entirely. A serpent in the path indeed. You'll want to remember that name, by the way. We're coming back to it. Naphtali comes next. His name means my wrestling, Rachel again, this time declaring she had wrestled with her sister Leah and won. Jacob's words over him are almost gentle by comparison. Naphtali is a hind let loose, he gives goodly words. A deer, running free, graceful. Naphtali's tribe would settle in the north, in beautiful hill country near the Sea of Galilee, land so fertile that centuries later, it's the same region where a carpenter from Nazareth would grow up and begin teaching. Then there's Gad. His name means, roughly, good fortune, and Jacob's blessing plays on the sound of that name almost like wordplay. Gad, a troop shall overtake him, but he shall overcome at the last. Pay attention to this one, because Gad's whole story is right there in that sentence, a tribe that would face raid after raid from enemies on the eastern frontier, and somehow, again and again, come out the other side. Asher's name means happy or blessed, and for once, Jacob's words match the name without any twist underneath. Out of Asher his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. Asher's territory would become some of the richest farmland and coastline in the whole region, olive oil, grain, trade routes along the Mediterranean. You could say it's the one tribe that genuinely lived up to its own name. Issachar stings a little more. His name likely means there is a reward or hired. His mother Leah literally bargained for a night with Jacob using mandrakes, a plant believed to help with fertility, and Issachar was the result of that bargain. Jacob's words over him are blunt, almost unflattering. Issachar is a strong donkey, crouching down between two burdens. He saw that rest was good, and the land that it was pleasant, and bowed his shoulder to bear, and became a servant to tribute. Not exactly a warrior's blessing. A tribe built for labor, for bearing weight, for choosing comfort over conflict, and paying a price for it later, in tribute and servitude. And this is where it gets remarkable. Zebulun, the last of Leah's own sons, gets a blessing that reads almost like a shipping forecast. Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be for a haven of ships, and his border shall be unto Sidon. A landlocked tribe, and yet Jacob prophesies a coastal life for them, ships, harbors, trade with the great Phoenician port of Sidon. And that's more or less exactly where Zebulun's territory would end up sitting, along key trade routes near the coast, centuries before Rome or Greece had any real presence in the region. 6 down. 6 very different men, standing in the same dim room, hearing 6 very different futures spoken over them in the space of a few minutes. But here's what you need to understand about all 6 of the tribes you just heard. Every one of them, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, would end up in the northern half of a divided kingdom of Israel. And that northern half is about to walk into the darkest chapter this story has. 2 sons are still waiting. And one of them isn't even in the room in the way you'd expect, because he's about to be represented twice. Joseph. The favorite son. Sold into slavery by some of his own brothers standing in that very room, dragged to Egypt in chains, thrown into prison on a false accusation, and somehow, against every possible odd, risen to become the second most powerful man in the entire nation. This is the son Jacob loved the most, and everyone in that room knew it. Jacob's words over him are the richest blessing of all 12. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. The archers have sorely grieved him, and shot at him, and hated him. But his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. Blessings of heaven above. Blessings of the deep. The blessings of your father have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors. Here's the detail that changes everything. Joseph doesn't get 1 tribe. He gets 2. His 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, are both adopted by Jacob personally, right there in that room, and each of them becomes the head of his own tribe. A double portion. The birthright that Reuben threw away at the start of this story doesn't just vanish. It gets handed, quietly, to the brother who suffered the most and forgave the most. And then, finally, the last brother steps forward. Benjamin. The only one of the 12 born in the promised land itself, and the only one whose birth killed his own mother. Rachel died delivering him, and with her last breath, she named him Benoni, son of my sorrow. Jacob couldn't bear that name. He renamed him, right there in that moment of grief, Benjamin, son of my right hand. Jacob's final words over him are fierce. Benjamin shall raven as a wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. A small tribe, but a fighting one, the tribe that would later produce Israel's first king, and centuries after that, a Pharisee named Saul who would persecute Christians before becoming the Apostle Paul. 12 sons. 12 destinies. All of it spoken in one room, by one dying man, in the space of a single chapter of Genesis. This is not a coincidence. This is not 12 lucky guesses from an old man rambling near death. This is a father who spent decades watching each of these men reveal exactly who they were, and on his last day alive, he simply said it out loud, to their faces, one at a time. Now here's what almost nobody talks about when they teach this story. 10 of these 12 tribes, every tribe except Judah and tiny Benjamin, would eventually break away from Jerusalem and form their own northern kingdom, simply called Israel, while Judah and Benjamin stayed loyal to the line of David in the south. 2 kingdoms. 1 family, permanently divided. The northern kingdom did not age well. Generation after generation of its kings turned toward idols, toward the same golden calves that Dan had set up centuries earlier. And in the year 722 BC, the empire of Assyria finally finished what it came to do. The Assyrian king Sargon II recorded, in his own royal inscriptions, the deportation of tens of thousands of people from the northern kingdom's capital, Samaria. The book of 2 Kings, chapter 17, describes it plainly. The king of Assyria carried Israel away and placed them in cities that most people today couldn't find on a map without help, cities in the region we now call northern Iraq and western Iran. And they never officially came back. Remember the name from the very beginning of this video? The one I told you we'd get to eventually? It's not one tribe. It's 9 of them. Reuben, Simeon, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, and both halves of Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim. 9 tribes, deported, resettled, and absorbed so completely into the populations around them that by the time the Jewish historian Josephus was writing, a century after Christ, even he could only say the 10 tribes remained beyond the Euphrates, an immense multitude, their exact location already a matter of rumor rather than record. That rumor never really stopped. Over the last 1,000 years, people have claimed those lost tribes ended up in Ethiopia, in Afghanistan, in Britain, in Japan, in India, in places on nearly every continent on Earth. Almost none of it can be proven. All of it comes from the same aching question. What happened to the family that scattered? And maybe that's the part of this story you actually recognize. Think about a family you've lost track of. The cousins you had as a child who you couldn't find on a map today if you tried. The branch of the family that stopped sending Christmas cards 2 decades ago. The relatives your own children have never met and don't even know exist. Now multiply that by 10 tribes, and by 27 centuries, and you start to understand what actually happened to the northern half of Israel. They didn't vanish because God erased them. They scattered the way every family eventually scatters, when enough time and enough distance and enough bad decisions pile up between people who used to share a table. So what do you actually do with all of this? Here's the first thing worth carrying with you. Jacob's words in that room were not sentiment. They were not a dying man saying nice things to make his sons feel better before he closed his eyes for the last time. Every single word was prophecy, and history, messy, centuries-long, often brutal history, bore almost all of it out. The birthright really did leave Reuben. The scattering really did happen to Levi, just not in the way anyone expected. The scepter really did stay with Judah, all the way to a king born in Bethlehem generations later. Here's the second thing. Being lost to history is not the same as being forgotten by God. The prophet Ezekiel, writing long after the northern kingdom had already vanished into Assyria, was told to take 2 sticks, one for Judah, one for the rest of Israel, and hold them together in his hand as a single piece of wood. God's own promise, spoken over a kingdom that had already scattered for good. One day, the two would be one again. 9 tribes gone quiet for 27 centuries. Not 9 tribes gone forever. And here's the last thing, and it's the one I want you to sit with. Every family that has ever scattered, whether it's 9 tribes disappearing into the hills of ancient Iran, or your own family spread across 3 states who barely call each other anymore, carries the same quiet hope underneath the silence. That distance is not the end of the story. That being lost to each other is not the same as being lost for good. That somewhere, a way back to the table still exists, even after 2,700 years. Which of the 12 tribes surprised you the most? Was it Levi's curse turning into a priesthood? Was it Dan disappearing from the record almost on purpose? Tell me below, because I read every single one of them. 12 sons walked into a dying man's room in Egypt. Only 2 of them are still easy to find on a map today. But all 12 are still waiting, somewhere in this story, to be found.